The dust-laden wind carried the scent of loss as Penelope Vance watched them lower her husband's pine coffin into the unforgiving Texas soil. At 32, she never imagined she'd be a widow in Salina, Texas, with nothing but debts, calloused hands, and a weathered farmhouse that threatened to collapse under the weight of unpaid mortgages. April 1878 marked 6 months since influenza had claimed Thomas. The drought that followed seemed to mirror the barrenness in Penelope's heart. She stood on her porch, auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun, staring at the withered crops that had once been their livelihood. Their small cattle operation had dwindled to 3 cows and a stubborn bull that refused to die despite the scarcity of grass. The bank would come calling soon enough. "We'll manage somehow," she whispered to herself, though the words rang hollow even to her own ears. The following morning, Penelope hitched her wagon to their last good horse. She'd taken to selling fresh eggs and baked goods in town to scrape together what meager earnings she could. As she prepared to leave, she noticed 2 figures slowly making their way down the dusty road toward her property. The elderly couple looked exhausted, their clothes dust-covered from travel. The man supported his wife, whose steps appeared labored and painful. "Excuse me, madam," the gentleman called out, his voice wavering with age. "We seem to have lost our way. We're looking for the Preston property." Penelope set down her basket. "The Preston Ranch is about 5 miles west of here. That's quite a distance to travel on foot, especially in this heat." The woman coughed, a dry, rattling sound that concerned Penelope immediately. "Please come inside. You need water and rest before continuing your journey." The couple introduced themselves as Martha and Joseph Abbott. They had traveled from Kansas to visit their son, whom they hadn't seen in nearly 3 years. "He's been sending us money," Martha explained as Penelope helped her into a chair at the kitchen table. "But letters aren't the same as seeing his face." Penelope nodded, understanding all too well the pain of separation. She served them cool water and the stew she'd made the previous evening, watching with satisfaction as color returned to their weathered faces. "You're too kind, Mrs. Vance," Joseph said. "We didn't expect such hospitality from a stranger. Please call me Penelope." And no one is a stranger in these parts for long. After they had eaten and rested, Penelope offered to drive them to the Preston Ranch in her wagon. It was out of her way and would delay her trip to town, but she couldn't bear the thought of the elderly couple walking miles in the scorching Texas sun. As they traveled, Martha told Penelope about their son, Preston Abbott. He came out west to make his fortune in cattle. Started with nothing but determination and a few head. Now, from his letters, it seems he's built quite an empire for himself. Penelope smiled politely, though she had never heard of Preston Abbott. The cattle barons of the region were well known, and she wondered if the elderly couple had exaggerated their son's success, as proud parents often did. The Preston Ranch appeared on the horizon, a sprawling property with fenced pastures, well-maintained outbuildings, and a large white house that stood in stark contrast to Penelope's modest farmhouse. A dozen cowboys worked cattle in the distance, evidence of a thriving operation. "This can't be right," Martha said, squinting at the house. "Preston never mentioned all this in his letters." Joseph looked equally confused. "Are you certain this is the Preston property?" "Yes, sir. This has been the Preston Ranch for as long as I can remember," Penelope replied, increasingly concerned that the couple had been misinformed about their son's whereabouts. A tall man emerged from the barn, his powerful stride and commanding presence drawing Penelope's attention. His dark hair was cropped short beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and his shoulders stretched the fabric of his crisp white shirt. Even from a distance, she could see he was a man accustomed to giving orders and having them obeyed. "Pa, Ma," the man stopped abruptly, staring at the wagon. "Preston." Martha cried out, her frail body suddenly animated with joy. Penelope watched in confusion as the man rushed toward them, his face transforming from surprise to genuine delight. What in God's name are you doing here?" Preston lifted his mother gently from the wagon, embracing her as if she might break. He turned to his father, clasping his hand firmly before pulling him into an embrace as well. "We decided to surprise you, son," Joseph explained. "We've missed you something fierce." Preston's gaze shifted to Penelope, who sat awkwardly on the wagon seat, uncertain if she should leave or introduce herself. "And who might this kind lady be?" he asked, his deep voice carrying a note of curiosity. "This is Penelope Vance," Martha said. "She took us in when we were lost and exhausted, fed us, gave us water, and then insisted on bringing us here herself." Preston removed his hat, revealing a strong jawline softened by a genuine smile. "Mrs. Vance, I'm deeply indebted to you for your kindness to my parents." Penelope nodded, suddenly conscious of her plain dress and work-worn hands. "Anyone would have done the same, Mr. Abbott. Preston, please." His eyes, the color of a summer storm, held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "Won't you come inside? I insist on offering you refreshment before your journey home." Before she could decline, Martha took her hand. "Yes, you must come in, dear. I'm sure you and Preston have much to talk about." The interior of the Preston house was as impressive as its exterior: polished wood floors, expensive furnishings, and paintings that surely came from back east. Penelope felt out of place among such luxury, acutely aware of the patches on her skirt and the calluses on her hands. Preston directed a housekeeper to bring refreshments while he settled his parents in the parlor. The woman, Mrs. Holloway, moved with efficient grace, casting curious glances at Penelope. "Mr. Abbott doesn't often have lady visitors," she whispered with a smile as she set down a tray of lemonade and cookies. Penelope blushed. "I'm merely the person who helped his parents find their way." When Preston returned, he sat across from Penelope, his presence filling the room. "My parents tell me you have a farm nearby, a small one," she admitted. "My husband and I ran it together until he passed last fall." Something flickered in Preston's eyes, sympathy perhaps, or understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Vance." "Thank you," she replied, the familiar ache of grief tightening her chest. "And please call me Penelope." Their conversation flowed surprisingly easily. Preston asked about her farm, and Penelope found herself sharing more than she intended: the failing crops, the dwindling livestock, the bank's increasing pressure. Preston listened intently, asking questions that revealed his extensive knowledge of farming and ranching. "It sounds like you could use some help," he said finally. Pride made her spine stiffen. "I'm managing Mr. Abbott, Preston," he corrected gently, "and I meant no offense. It's just that I have men who could clear that north field you mentioned, get it ready for planting before the season's too far gone. I couldn't possibly accept such charity." Preston leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Not charity, Penelope, payment for the kindness you showed my parents. They mean the world to me." Martha and Joseph exchanged a look that Penelope couldn't quite interpret. "Our Preston has always been stubborn," Martha said with a fond smile. "Best to agree before he wears you down." Penelope laughed despite herself. "He reminds me of someone I know." The sun was beginning to set when Penelope finally prepared to leave. Preston insisted on accompanying her home, sending a ranch hand to follow with her wagon while she rode in his more comfortable buggy. As they traveled, Preston revealed more about himself: how he'd arrived in Texas with little more than ambition, built his herd from a few dozen cattle to thousands, diversified into horses and eventually mining interests. His wealth was not inherited but earned through intelligence and relentless work. "My parents don't know the extent of it," he admitted. "I've sent them money, but I've downplayed my success in my letters. They're simple people who value humility." "I worried they might not understand this life I've built." Penelope nodded. "They seem very proud of you, regardless of your wealth." "And you?" Preston asked, his voice dropping lower. "What do you think of a man who has more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes?" The question caught her off guard. "I think wealth doesn't define a man's character. how he treats others, especially those who can do nothing for him. That's the measure of a man. Preston's smile in the fading light made something flutter in Penelope's chest, a sensation she hadn't felt since Thomas first courted her. When they reached her farmhouse, Preston didn't immediately turn back. Instead, he walked the property with her, noting the sagging roof, the failing well pump, the fence posts that needed replacing. His assessment was practical rather than judgmental, and Penelope found herself grateful for his expertise. "I'll send some men tomorrow to start on the most pressing repairs," he said as he prepared to leave. "Preston, I can't," he held up a hand. "My parents will be staying with me for at least a month. During that time, I'd like them to have proper meals and company when I'm attending to business. Would you consider coming to the ranch each day to help care for them? I'd pay you, of course." The offer was both a solution to her financial troubles and a way to preserve her dignity. Penelope recognized the diplomacy in his approach. "I would be honored to help care for your parents," she said finally. "They're wonderful people." Preston's smile warmed her more than it should have. "Then it's settled. I'll see you tomorrow, Penelope Vance." True to his word, Preston sent workers the following morning. By midday, they had repaired her roof, fixed the well pump, and begun clearing the overgrown north field. Penelope spent the day at the Preston ranch, cooking meals that Martha insisted were better than anything they'd eaten in years, and listening to Joseph's stories of Kansas life. Preston returned late in the afternoon, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere in the house. He greeted his parents warmly, but his eyes sought out Penelope, lingering on her face in a way that made her cheeks warm. "How did you find my parents today?" he asked as they stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of orange and pink. "They're delightful company," Penelope replied honestly. "Your mother taught me her secret recipe for apple pie, and your father showed me photographs of you as a boy." Preston groaned. "Those still exist. I hoped they'd been lost in some fortuitous fire." Penelope laughed. "You were a handsome child. Those curls were quite something." And now, his question hung between them, laden with meaning. Penelope looked away, unable to meet his intense gaze. "Now you're a successful rancher with far too much confidence." Preston chuckled, a deep sound that resonated through her. "And you, Penelope Vance, are a woman of remarkable strength and pride." Days turned to weeks, and Penelope found herself looking forward to her time at the Preston ranch. Martha and Joseph treated her like family, sharing stories and skills, asking about her life with genuine interest. Preston was often away on business, but when present, his attention to Penelope was unmistakable. He brought her gifts from his travels, a fine leather-bound journal from Austin, handcrafted hair combs from San Antonio, a bolt of blue silk that matched her eyes. Each gift was presented casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, yet Penelope recognized their value and the thought behind them. The work on her farm continued. The north field was cleared and planted with corn, the fences repaired, and the barn restored to soundness. Preston had even replaced her aging horse with 2 strong mares better suited to farm work. One evening, as Penelope prepared to leave, Preston asked her to stay for dinner. "My parents have retired early, but I'd enjoy your company," he said, his voice carrying a note of vulnerability she hadn't heard before. They dined on the porch, watching stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. Preston spoke of his dreams for the ranch, his plans to expand into new territories, his hope to establish a legacy that would outlive him. "And what of your dreams, Penelope?" he asked, refilling her wine glass. The question caught her off guard. Dreams had seemed like luxuries since Thomas's death, replaced by the daily struggle for survival. "I used to dream of a house full of children," she admitted, "a thriving farm, enough prosperity to help others in need." "Those are worthy dreams," Preston said softly, "and not beyond reach." Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, Penelope allowed herself to imagine a future different from the lonely one she had resigned herself to. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger, bringing news that required Preston's immediate attention. As he escorted her to her wagon, his hand brushed hers, a brief contact that sent warmth spreading through her. "I'll see you tomorrow," he asked, his voice hopeful. Penelope nodded, unable to deny the anticipation she felt at the prospect. The following day, Penelope arrived at the Preston ranch to find Martha alone in the kitchen, looking worried. "Joseph took a fall this morning," she explained. "Preston summoned the doctor, but he's concerned. My husband isn't as strong as he once was." Penelope immediately took charge, preparing a broth for Joseph and helping Martha apply cool compresses to his forehead to combat the fever that had developed. When Preston returned with the doctor, his face tight with worry, Penelope met him at the door. "He's resting comfortably," she assured him. "Your mother has been by his side all morning." The relief in Preston's eyes was palpable. "Thank you, Penelope. I don't know what we would have done without you." The doctor confirmed Joseph had developed pneumonia, a dangerous condition for a man of his age. The next several days would be critical. Preston insisted Penelope stay at the ranch during Joseph's illness, offering her a guest room near his parents' quarters. She agreed, knowing Martha needed the support and, if she were honest with herself, wanting to be near Preston during this difficult time. The days that followed established a new routine. Penelope cared for Joseph during the day while Martha rested, and Preston took the night watch, refusing to leave his father's side despite his business responsibilities. One night, unable to sleep, Penelope found Preston on the porch, staring into the darkness. His shoulders, usually so straight and confident, were slumped with exhaustion and worry. "You should rest," she said softly, joining him. Preston turned, his face etched with fatigue. "I can't lose him, Penelope. Not now, when I finally have the means to give them the life they deserve." Without thinking, Penelope reached for his hand. "Your parents are immensely proud of you, Preston, but it's not this house or your success they treasure, it's you." Preston's fingers tightened around hers. "When I was a boy, my father worked from dawn until dusk to keep food on our table. My mother took in laundry to help make ends meet. They sacrificed everything for me, and I promised myself I would repay them someday." "And you have," Penelope assured him, "but the greatest gift you can give them now is your time and love." Preston's gaze held hers, vulnerability and something deeper reflected in his eyes. Slowly, deliberately, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You are an extraordinary woman, Penelope Vance." The intimacy of the moment wrapped around them like a warm blanket, comfortable and right. They stayed on the porch until dawn broke, talking of childhood memories, hopes for the future, and the unexpected turns life could take. Joseph's condition improved gradually over the following week. The fever broke, his cough eased, and his appetite returned, much to Martha's relief and Preston's visible joy. "It was your cooking that saved him," Preston told Penelope as they walked the perimeter of the ranch one evening. "Ma swears your chicken soup has healing properties." Penelope laughed. "If only it were that simple. Your father is strong-willed like his son." Preston stopped walking, turning to face her. In the fading light, his features were softened, his customary confidence replaced by an almost boyish uncertainty. "Penelope, I've been meaning to ask you something." Her heart skipped a beat. "Yes, my parents will be returning to Kansas soon, once Pa is strong enough to travel." He took a deep breath. "I find myself reluctant to see you leave as well." Penelope waited, scarcely breathing. "Would you consider staying on? Not as my parents' caretaker, but as my companion." The request was unexpected yet not entirely surprising. Over the past weeks, their connection had deepened, transcending the circumstances that had brought them together. "Preston, I'm not proposing marriage," he clarified quickly. "Not yet. I respect you too much to rush such a decision. But I would like the opportunity to court you properly, to see if what I feel for you might be returned." Penelope studied his face, searching for any sign of insincerity. Instead, she found only earnest hope and a vulnerability that touched her deeply. "I would like that," she admitted softly, Preston's smile was brilliant, transforming his entire countenance. He took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "You've brought light back into my life, Penelope Vance. I intend to spend a very long time showing you exactly how grateful I am for that gift." As Joseph continued to recover, Penelope divided her time between the Preston ranch and her own farm, which was slowly being restored to productivity under Preston's guidance. The corn in the north field grew tall and promising, the cattle were healthy, and for the first time since Thomas's death, Penelope began to believe her farm might survive. Preston's courtship was as deliberate and thoughtful as the man himself. He brought books he thought she might enjoy, engaged her in conversations about everything from cattle breeding to politics, and listened to her opinions with genuine interest. He introduced her to neighboring ranchers and their wives, proudly presenting her as a woman of substance and value. In early June, Preston invited Penelope to accompany him to Salina for a town gathering. As they walked through the busy streets, Penelope was acutely aware of the curious glances and whispered comments that followed them. "People are talking," she murmured to Preston. "Let them," he replied, placing her hand in the crook of his arm. "I'm escorting the most beautiful woman in Texas. I'd be disappointed if they didn't notice." The banker who had been pressuring Penelope about her mortgage approached them, his manner dramatically different from their previous encounters. "Mrs. Vance, Mr. Abbott," he greeted them, tipping his hat. "Lovely day, isn't it?" "Indeed it is, Mr. Hargrove," Preston replied smoothly. "I trust there won't be any more issues regarding Mrs. Vance's property," the banker swallowed visibly. "No, sir. As I explained to Mrs. Vance yesterday, we've reassessed her situation and are pleased to extend more favorable terms." Preston nodded, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Excellent. I'm always pleased to see local businesses supporting our community members, especially widows trying to maintain their livelihoods." As they continued walking, Penelope glanced up at Preston. "What did you do?" "Nothing that wasn't within my rights as a significant depositor at Mr. Hargrove's bank," Preston replied, a mischievous glint in his eye. Penelope should have been offended by his interference, but she found herself touched by his protective instinct instead. "Thank you," she said simply. That evening they dined at the town's finest restaurant, a place Penelope had never entered during her marriage to Thomas. Preston ordered champagne to celebrate Joseph's recovery and their official courtship. "To new beginnings," he toasted, his eyes never leaving hers. "To new beginnings," she echoed, allowing herself to embrace the hope blossoming in her heart. As summer progressed, Joseph regained his strength. By late July, he and Martha were preparing to return to Kansas, though Preston had extracted a promise that they would return for Christmas. The night before their departure, Martha took Penelope aside, her weathered hands clasping Penelope's younger ones. "I want to thank you," the older woman said, her eyes bright with emotion. "Not just for helping care for Joseph, but for what you've done for Preston." "I haven't done anything," Penelope protested. Martha shook her head. "You've given him something to care about beyond his business interests and his old parents. I've watched him with you, Penelope. He looks at you the way Joseph has looked at me for 50 years. Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I care for him deeply, Martha." "I know you do, dear, and that's why I want you to have this." Martha pressed a small velvet box into Penelope's hand. "It was my mother's and her mother's before that. I've been saving it for Preston's wife someday." Inside the box was a delicate gold ring set with a modest pearl. "Martha, I can't accept this. Preston and I aren't, not yet," Martha interrupted with a knowing smile. "But a mother knows these things. Keep it safe until the time is right." The following morning, Preston and Penelope saw Martha and Joseph off on the eastbound train. As the train pulled away, Preston slipped his arm around Penelope's waist, a public declaration of his affection that didn't go unnoticed by the other people on the platform. "Will you come to dinner tonight?" he asked as they walked back to his carriage. "The house will be too quiet without them." Penelope nodded, already missing the elderly couple who had become like family to her. I'd like that. Dinner that evening was a more subdued affair than usual. Preston seemed distracted, his normally fluid conversation punctuated by long silences and thoughtful glances at Penelope. "Is something wrong?" she finally asked as they sat on the porch afterward, watching lightning bugs dance in the gathering dusk. Preston took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about the future, Penelope. My future, our future, if I may be so bold." Her heart quickened. "Oh, these past months have been the happiest of my life, having my parents here, watching my father recover his health, building this connection with you." He turned to face her fully. "I never expected to find someone like you, Penelope, someone who values honesty and hard work above wealth and status, someone who sees me, not just the ranch or the bank accounts." Preston slid from his chair to one knee before her, taking her hands in his. "I had planned a more elaborate proposal, perhaps a trip to San Antonio, dinner at the finest restaurant, a carriage ride under the stars. But I find I can't wait another day to ask you to be my wife." Tears filled Penelope's eyes. "Preston, I know it hasn't been long," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "And if you need more time, I'll wait. But I love you, Penelope Vance. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you." From his pocket, he produced a ring, a stunning diamond set in platinum, far more elaborate than Martha's simple pearl. "Will you marry me?" Penelope looked at the ring, then at the man offering it, this man who had come into her life when she least expected it, who had restored not just her farm but her belief in the possibility of happiness. "Yes," she whispered, then more confidently, "Yes, Preston Abbott, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to pull her into his arms. Their kiss was tender at first, then deepened with the promise of a future together, filled with love and partnership. When they finally parted, Preston pressed his forehead to hers. "You've made me the happiest man in Texas, and you've given me a second chance at happiness when I thought that door was closed forever." They decided on a small wedding in September, when the worst heat of the Texas summer had passed. Martha and Joseph would return for the ceremony, and Preston insisted on bringing in a proper minister from Austin rather than using the itinerant preacher who occasionally visited Salina. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of preparations. Preston had seamstresses create a trousseau worthy of a cattle baron's wife, despite Penelope's protests that she needed nothing so elaborate. He expanded the main house, adding a library filled with books he knew she would enjoy and a larger kitchen designed for someone who loved to cook. Penelope, meanwhile, ensured her farm continued to thrive. She had no intention of abandoning the land she and Thomas had worked so hard to cultivate, even after marrying Preston. To her delight, Preston supported her decision, suggesting they maintain both properties and divide their time between them. "Your independence is one of the qualities I most admire," he told her. "I wouldn't dream of asking you to give up something that matters so deeply to you." The town of Salina buzzed with gossip about the upcoming nuptials. That the wealthiest man in the county would marry a widow of modest means was unexpected, and speculation about Penelope's methods of securing such a match ran rampant. Preston was furious when he heard the whispers, ready to confront anyone who dared impugn Penelope's character, but she calmed him with a hand on his arm and wisdom in her words. "Let them talk," she said, echoing his earlier sentiment. "Those who matter know the truth." Her composure in the face of petty jealousy only increased Preston's admiration for her. This woman, who had faced the loss of her husband and the potential loss of her livelihood with quiet dignity, was stronger than anyone he had ever known. Martha and Joseph arrived a week before the wedding, bringing with them a handmade quilt as a wedding gift. "For your new life together," Martha explained as she presented it to Penelope. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, a perfect September morning. Penelope dressed in her new gown of ivory silk, her hair arranged by the hairdresser Preston had brought from Austin. When she looked in the mirror, She hardly recognized herself, not because of the elegant gown or carefully styled hair, but because of the happiness that radiated from her very being. The ceremony was held on the grounds of the Preston Ranch, beneath an arch of late summer roses. Neighbors and friends gathered to witness the union, their previous gossip forgotten in the face of the couple's obvious devotion. Preston waited at the altar, his usual confidence tempered by visible emotion, as Penelope walked toward him on Joseph's arm. When the elderly man placed Penelope's hand in Preston's, the connection between them was palpable to everyone present. "I, Preston James Abbott, take thee, Penelope Grace Vance, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Penelope repeated the vows, her voice clear despite the tears that threatened to fall. "I, Penelope Grace Vance, take thee, Preston James Abbott, to be my lawfully wedded husband. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Preston kissed his bride with a tenderness that belied his powerful frame. The gathered crowd erupted in applause, even those who had been most skeptical of the match touched by the genuine love evident between the newlyweds. The celebration continued well into the evening, with food, music, and dancing under the stars. Preston and Penelope moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes with gracious smiles. "Are you happy, Mrs. Abbott?" Preston murmured in her ear as they danced. Penelope looked up at her husband, this man who had found her at her lowest point and lifted her up without diminishing her strength or independence. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied truthfully. Later that night, as they prepared to depart for their honeymoon, a month-long journey to San Francisco, Preston presented Penelope with one final wedding gift, the deed to her farm, now free and clear of all debts. "This is yours," he said simply. "No matter what happens, you will always have your independence." Tears filled Penelope's eyes. "Thank you for understanding what this means to me." Preston cupped her face gently. "I don't just understand it, Penelope, I love it about you. I love your strength, your determination, your kindness. I love that you took in two lost, elderly strangers and cared for them as if they were your own family. I love that you face each challenge with grace and courage." He kissed her then, a promise sealed with passion and tenderness. "And I love you, Preston Abbott," she whispered against his lips, "for seeing me as I am and loving me not despite my circumstances, but because of who those circumstances have helped me become." Their honeymoon was a time of discovery of each other, of new places, of the future they would build together. They returned to Texas in late October, their bond strengthened by shared experiences and deepened intimacy. Life as Mrs. Preston Abbott brought changes Penelope could never have anticipated. She became a hostess to important businessmen and politicians, a philanthropist supporting causes throughout the region, and a respected voice in community affairs. Yet she remained fundamentally the same woman who had taken in two lost travelers on a dusty Texas road, practical, compassionate, and grounded in what truly mattered. Preston, for his part, found that his wealth and success meant more now that he had someone to share it with. He expanded his business interests, but made time for the things that brought genuine joy: quiet evenings with Penelope, visits to and from his parents, and days spent working alongside his wife on her farm. The following spring brought the news they had both been hoping for. Penelope was expecting their first child. Preston's reaction was everything she could have wished for: joy mingled with protective concern, excitement tempered with reverence for the miracle growing within her. "A child," he whispered, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child." Penelope covered his hand with hers. "The first of several, I hope." Preston's eyes shone with unshed tears. "I love you more each day, Penelope Abbott." Just when I think my heart couldn't possibly hold more, you prove me wrong. Martha and Joseph returned to Texas for the birth, arriving a month before Penelope's due date to help prepare for their grandchild's arrival. Martha shared wisdom gained from raising Preston and two daughters who had not survived childhood, while Joseph crafted a beautiful wooden cradle for the baby. On a sweltering August day in 1879, Penelope gave birth to a son they named James Thomas Abbott James, for Preston's father and Thomas in honor of Penelope's first husband, a gesture that demonstrated Preston's security in their love and his respect for her past. "He's perfect," Preston whispered as he held his son for the first time, wonder and love transforming his usually composed features. Penelope watched her husband cradle their child, exhaustion forgotten in the face of such profound joy. "He has your eyes." "And your determination," Preston replied with a smile as the infant gripped his finger with surprising strength. The years that followed brought more children, twin daughters, Elizabeth and Catherine, in 1881, and another son, William, in 1884. Their family divided time between the Preston Ranch and Penelope's farm, which had become a profitable operation in its own right under her continued management. Preston's business empire continued to grow, expanding into railroads and banking, but he made family his priority, teaching his sons the value of hard work and honest dealing, showing his daughters that strength came in many forms. Penelope ensured all their children learned practical skills alongside their formal education, believing self-reliance was the greatest gift they could bestow. Martha and Joseph spent their remaining years alternating between Kansas and Texas, watching their grandchildren grow with evident pride. When Joseph passed peacefully in his sleep in 1886, Martha chose to remain in Texas permanently, finding comfort in the daily chaos and joy of life with her son's family. In 1888, 10 years after they first met, Preston surprised Penelope with an anniversary gift that moved her to tears. A school for the children of ranch workers and farming families, ensuring they would have educational opportunities regardless of their parents' means. "You changed my life when you showed kindness to my parents," he told her as they stood before the newly constructed schoolhouse. "This will allow others to change their lives through knowledge and opportunity." Penelope squeezed his hand, overcome with love for this man who continued to grow in compassion and generosity. "From the moment your parents appeared on my doorstep, my life has been blessed beyond measure." Preston brought her hand to his lips. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if they hadn't gotten lost that day? If they had found my ranch without your help?" "I don't believe they were lost at all," Penelope replied softly. "I believe they were precisely where they were meant to be, leading us to where we were meant to be." Preston nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Together, always together," Penelope agreed, leaning into his embrace as they watched their children play in the yard of the schoolhouse that would become their legacy. As the century drew to a close, Preston and Penelope Abbott had become fixtures in the community, respected, admired, and beloved for their generosity and fairness. Their children grew into capable, compassionate adults who understood the value of both wealth and work, privilege and purpose. On warm summer evenings, Preston and Penelope still sat on the porch of her original farmhouse, watching the sun set over fields that continued to produce abundant crops. Sometimes they spoke of the future, planning for their grandchildren and the world they would inhabit. Other times they reminisced about the past, the chance meeting that had changed both their lives, the challenges they had overcome together, the family they had built. "If someone had told me that day I found you feeding my parents that I would love you for the rest of my life, I wouldn't have believed them," Preston admitted one such evening, his hand entwined with hers as it had been countless times over the years. "No." Penelope smiled, the lines around her eyes deepening. "I think some part of me knew even then that you would change my life forever." Preston leaned over to kiss her, the gesture as natural as breathing after 20 years of marriage. You saved me, Penelope Abbott. From a life of wealth without meaning, success without joy. And you saved me, she replied, resting her head against his shoulder, by seeing value in me when I had forgotten my own worth. As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, surrounded by the legacy they had built together, a legacy of love that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a dusty Texas road in the spring of 1878, when a widow had opened her door to two lost travelers, and in doing so, found her way to an unexpected and abundant life.